You're joining us now, without further ado, former Virginia Secretary of Natural Resources in the Bob McDonnell administration and the former Deputy Chief of Staff of the U.S. Department of the Interior in the George Bush II administration, Doug Domenech. Great to have you, Doug.
Thank you, John. Good morning, and it's great to be with you and your listeners for some Common Sense Radio. You know, common sense is a rare commodity here in Washington, D.C.
You got that right. Very rare these days, and it's getting worse. Now, speaking of no common sense, there's a couple of regulations the Obama EPA is now trying to shove down our throat that is going to affect Virginia and Southwest Virginians and all Virginians, because it always ends up you're paying higher prices. What are they, Doug?
Well, that's exactly right, and these kinds of EPA regulations can get complicated, so let me see if I can boil it down for your listeners in 3 points. First, EPA is proposing 2 new air quality standards, one related to ozone, and the other targeting plants that use coal to generate the energy we use. Second, these rules could actually be the most expensive EPA rules in history, and they're going to cost every Virginian and every Virginia business in the Commonwealth. And then third, our U.S. senators, both Tim Kaine and John Warner, can actually stop these rules from happening, and I encourage everyone to call them and ask them to stop these new EPA air rules.
Now, if I can, Doug, put in layman's terms, let's separate these two out and just put in layman's terms why they're bad for Virginia.
Yeah, let me set the stage just a little bit for your listeners. You know, we have to remember that the environment, our air and water quality, is cleaner now in Virginia than it's been in probably the last 100 years. And in fact, in the last 4 years, there was a 92% reduction in ozone and a 27% reduction in CO2. So we've got a great story to tell here in Virginia. And in fact, if you were handing out grades, you'd give Virginia an A for air quality. But now EPA is changing the grading system. So instead of getting an A, we're going to get an F in kind of a moving target. And under these rules, they're not even able to tell us how we can attain an A. So that's what makes this not common sense.
What's their objective, Doug?
Well, again, the 2 rules are a little bit different. I guess the conservative in me would say their objective is to destroy American manufacturing, but their objective would be to reduce the amount of ozone in America or in Virginia, and to reduce the amount of CO2 production. And the impact, though, the question is whether the benefits are worth the cost. And under a number of studies that have just come out, including Governor McAuliffe's own energy plan, we learned that these ozone rules are going to cost every Virginian more. It'll cost more to drive our cars and trucks. It's going to force utilities to shut down over 30% of our electric generating capacity. We're likely to lose 36,000 jobs across the Commonwealth and $46 billion in our economy through 2040. And the actual cost just to comply with the new rules is estimated at $11 billion. So these are huge costs that everyone is going to suffer from. So, for instance, if you were building chainsaws at the steel plant in Virginia Beach,
yes,
or if you're working at a data center in Danville or Northern Virginia, or if you're making craft beer in Richmond, all of these plants are going to have some kind of increased cost. So they're going to have to make decisions whether or not they're going to change their process or lower their production, and we just think that there are going to be huge layoffs as a result of these kinds of new rules. And that's why we're encouraging people to call the senators.
Doug, this is insanity beyond anything you can imagine, and it's one of those things that gets pushed off everybody's radar screen, which I think is part of their strategy. You look at this stuff that the Obama EPA is doing and how they cost jobs, raise energy, makes no sense, and you just, you get through the policies and you get through what you have to do to stop it. It's almost like whack-a-mole. It's like there's another one of these crazy things popping up every 4 or 5 weeks, and you're trying to eradicate them out. But Doug Domenech, former Secretary of Virginia Secretary of Natural Resources in the Bob McDonnell administration with us, also former Deputy Chief of Staff for the U.S. Department of Interior under GW. I got to get back to, before, again, we get into specifically what we have to do to stop it, I have to get back. People are sitting there, the EPA, coming up with this stuff. And we know that what they're telling us is not the real objective. We know that. You just demonstrated that by some of the facts you gave out. So what are they trying to do? At the end of the day, what does Obama want his EPA legacy to be? We've shut down. There's no manufacturing. There's no coal. There's no energy. What is it? Where we become third world?
Well, you're right. There's definitely a war on coal, and that's part of their goal. I think the president has decided in his climate action plan that he's not going to get things through Congress, so he's just going to do things on his own. So he's told the EPA to just go at it, and they have been producing a number of rules that have been problematic. These are just the latest two. And let me tell you one other thing that just makes no common sense. So they're trying to, on the CO2 rule, to get us to reduce the amount of CO2, but in measuring progress, we're not allowed to count any progress we've made since 2005, and we're also not allowed to count our nuclear power generation in Virginia. And the nuclear, as you know, is zero emitting. It emits no CO2. Nuclear accounts for about 40% of Virginia's generating capacity, but we can't count that as a contribution we're making to clean air.
Why?
So, that just makes absolute no sense. That's their rules, and it makes no sense.
It's almost like we're living in a surreal world where I was thinking the other day as we report on this every day, it almost reminds me of like the Mad Hatter and Alice in Wonderland. Like it's just you wake up from this bad dream because nothing makes any sense. You're sitting down with a tea party basically with a Mad Hatter and a mouse. This stuff makes no sense, and people just going about their daily lives, worrying about what new iPhone came out. Meantime, jobs are being crushed by the day. China is building, Doug, a coal plant a week. And do you think they're investing in all the expensive technology in order to be sure, like we have, that it's the cleanest coal possible? No way. A coal plant a week. Insane.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's why no matter what Virginia does, it's not going to make any effect on the climate or the amount of CO2 that's produced, primarily because India and China are not complying, and so the amount really is so infinitesimal. Meanwhile, if these go into place, these ozone rules are going to actually, we predict anyway, raise everybody's electric cost by 15%. It's like it's going to raise natural gas prices for everybody 32%. And it's probably going to require us to shut down 30% of our generating capacity in Virginia. And this just does not make sense. So, as you said, people are used to flipping the switch and getting their lights to come on, whether that's first thing in the morning or at midnight. And the reality is we get very complacent when it comes to energy.
Well, those days are over. I've only got a couple minutes, Doug. Tell our audience, what is the call to action? What do they have to do in order to stop this madness?
Well, at this point, because there are different deadlines, the CO2 rule comment period has been extended to December 1. I don't think people need to be sending in comments. Lots are going in, but they need to call Senator Kaine and Senator Warner and ask them to tell EPA to stop doing these rules. It's not enough to have it just delayed. Those rules are going to come into place probably in June of next year. On the ozone, we're still waiting for the White House to tell us what the new rule will be, and we expect that by December the 1st. And once again, both Tim Kaine and Mark Warner can stop these rules from going forward. They've got the power to do it. I encourage people to get on the phones, get on the Internet, and call our two U.S. senators.
All right, that's what we have to do.